Hello, welcome to another episode of Learning GenServer with me. This episode, we are going to look at the different restart values that are supported by the supervisor. One of the major features of a supervisor is to be able to restart a child process when it terminates. All along this series, we've been creating an application that is responsible for sending messages to the given phone number. In this application, we have the sender supervisor, which is the main supervisor, that is started when the application is started. Then we have the message server dynamic supervisor, which is passed as a child of the sender supervisor. This dynamic supervisor is responsible for starting the GenServer process on demand. This GenServer process, they're assigned the task of sending messages to the given phone number. Our GenServer process can terminate when it completes its job, or if something goes wrong, for example, an error is raised within the child process. So what happens when the child process terminates? Let's jump into the code and see. This is the message server. When we call the start message server, we're going to start the GenServer process. And once the GenServer process is started, we can be able to send a request to it, a send message request, to send a message to the given phone number. So this is the callback that will be responsible for handling that message. In this callback, you can see that you are returning no reply, state, and continue send message. So the handle continue is going to handle the sending of message, and you can see if the status is failed or done, we are going to stop our GenServer process from running. So the status can be failed if the sending of the message is not successful after a number of retrials, and it's done and when it successfully send the message. Let's start our GenServer process, then send a send message request to send a message to the given phone number. To start the application, I'll be running ix-smix command. Then let's call, I will pattern match this to get hold of the PID. Call message server dot start message server. In this case, I don't have to pass anything. It will use the default arguments. Our GenServer process has been started, and this is the PID of the GenServer process. Already it's listening to the retry request and the status is new. Now we can use the GenServer cast. The GenServer cast to send a send message request. It takes in the PID or the name of the register or the name that you register your GenServer process with. So I can choose to pass the PID or an atom one. Then this is the send message, and I can give it any number that I will. At this point, I've been able to send the request. You can see we are having the output here, sending message to 111, process termination with reason normal. And also you can see the logger info. We are being informed that the job is completed with the status done. So the question was, what happens if the child process is terminated? In our case, the job has been terminated after it has completed its job successfully. Then if you notice here, you can see listening to retry request status new. This only happens when the GenServer process is started. So that means that our job has been completed and we have stopped the GenServer from running, the previous GenServer process from running, and a new GenServer process has been started. And this is what the supervisor is doing. it has started another GenServer process. Let's confirm if that's the case. So what we do is we had the PID, the initial PID. Let's do process, check if that process is alive and pass the PID. So that process is not alive. So which process is alive? We can use dynamic supervisor which children to determine which child process has been started. So if we check on this, you can see that we have another PID which is different from what we had initially. So this is the current process that is running. Okay, so that was one of the example when we have the job completed. The other reason that the child process can be terminated is if something goes wrong within the GenServer process. So what I want us to do now is to introduce an error within our GenServer process, within our message server. So when the GenServer process is started, it's going to invoke the init callback. And when this initialization is successful, the GenServer process will be running. So I want this initialization to be successful, yes, but at the point where it's running, an error is raised. So the best part to introduce that error is in our init callback, we are sending a retry request after every 5 seconds once the process has been initialized. So at this point, after 5 seconds, we can make the GenServer process raise an error. So at this point, when the status is new, we can make it to raise an error before sending another retry request. So recompile to pick up the new changes. And once we have recompiled, you can see that it has listening to retry request, then an error has been raised. With this case scenario, you can see if the process is terminated either by job completion or an error has been raised within the child process, the supervisor is able to restart. So it does not know that the GenServer process has terminated with an error or not. This default behavior of a supervisor is happening because of the restart value called the permanent. So the permanent restart value is the one that is causing the GenServer process to always be restarted by the supervisor, even though the process termination is not caused by an error.